Now we know that there are living cells inside of bones, and that cells called osteoblasts, they built this stuff called matrix, and then they got stuck inside of it. And once they got stuck, they turned into osteocytes. And as osteocytes, they're going to go ahead and monitor that bone and maintain it. And if they ever notice that there's an area that's damaged, they're going to send out a call for help, and that will attract cells called osteoclasts to the area. We learned that osteoclasts chew up bone, and after the bone area gets chewed up, it's designed for osteoblasts to come in and rebuild that area of bone, etc. Let's look at how that actually is organized when you look at an area of compact bone through the microscope. So on this particular image, each one of these little purple spider thingies is an osteocyte. So there's an osteocyte, there's an osteocyte, right? They've really blown them up. And you can see that this sort of tan material, that is matrix. Matrix was released by these cells back when they were young, foolish osteoblasts. And these cells released it. Then it attracted calcium and phosphorus. Then they got stuck. And now these cells are like, oh, I guess I'll be an osteocyte. And their skinny little arms reach through that matrix. So if there's ever a crack in the bone, those skinny little arms are going to sense it. And they're going to go, okay, we better fix that. And then they will send out a call that will attract osteoclasts to that region of bone. Those osteoclasts are going to chew up the damaged matrix, take it away, and then new osteoblasts will come in and rebuild things. Now, in compact bone, we're talking about the organization of compact bone. In compact bone, there's a limit to the blood supply of the bone, although bone has got very good blood supply compared to other connective tissues. But in order to maximize the blood supply to this stuff called bone, these cells are organized into units that are called osteons. Osteon. Now, osteons, actually, there's a model in the lab. Well, let me show you. There's in our lab, there's a heavy plaster model of an osteon. Oh, by the way, this website is cerritos-anatomy.com. Cerritos-anatomy.com. It's not particularly useful for bones, but once we get to muscles and everything anatomy after that, it's very useful. But for bone, all it has here are the two cross sections of the osteon. Now, when you look at this, you're like, oh, what the heck am I looking at? Okay. And this is, if we were looking through a microscope, this is what we would see. Do you notice how that doesn't work. Do you notice how there are these kind of rings of tissue? The stuff that is in beige, that is matrix. That is non-living stuff outside of cells with calcium and phosphorus in it. And you see how it's like rings on a tree. Here's one ring, here's another ring, there's a third ring, right? Now, inside here, the red with the blue nucleus, these are osteocytes. Oh, all you have to do is click on the link and it says osteocyte within lacuna. So that is an osteocyte. There's an osteocyte. There's an osteocyte. When he was young, he actually built that ring of matrix, and now he's trapped, and he became an osteocyte. And his skinny little red arms are reaching through to touch his friend's arms. And the reason that they are is because this cell and this cell and this cell, they need oxygen and they need glucose. Not a whole lot, but they do. And where do they get it from? Well, here's where the blood is. The blood is way out here. So every molecule of oxygen needs to get handed from the blood to this osteocyte, who hands it to his friend, who hands it to his friend, who hands it to his friend, who hands it to his friend. And there's only a certain distance that oxygen can diffuse, so there's a limit to the size or the number of rings in every osteon. Let me also emphasize that those little holes that the osteocytes are stuck in for the rest of their lives are called lacunae, and that these rings of matrix are called lamella. You can call them a concentric lamella, but lamella. So this whole thing is an osteon in cross section. Let's go back to the image from your textbook. Great. Oops. Image from your textbook. So this is what we were just looking at. This is an osteon, right? But we were looking straight down at it. And the purple cells are the osteocytes. They were red and navy blue in the model. And they are reaching their little skinny arms to each other. And there are these concentric rings called lamellae. Now, if you were to look inside of this compact bone, you would see that this osteon extends for a really long way down the length of the bone. So osteons are not short little chunks like our model. Osteons are long, microscopically narrow tubes made of rings called lamellae that were made by osteoblasts who became those purple osteocytes who are now trapped inside of lacuna between the lamellae, and they're busy monitoring the bone. Oh, let me point out here is periosteum, that kind of thick connective tissue shrink wrapped around the bone. There are cells there that can turn into osteoblasts. And when the cells there turn into osteoblasts, they will make new osteons on the outside. So here, the periosteum, there could be a new osteon made there, and that would push out the diameter of the bone. So from the time you were a baby, when your femur was that big, and now maybe your femur is like that big, was because it was growing in width through cells that are there at the periosteum. Right, good. So each osteon has a central canal. The central canal holds blood vessels and a nerve. And then the osteoblasts laid down matrix and concentric rings that are called lamellae. And the osteocytes are stuck in little caves that are called lacunae, and they're surrounded by the matrix that they made, and they're now monitoring the bone. So the osteon is the basic unit of compact bone tissue. Great, okay? So the osteocytes, those are the bone cells. They sit in lacunae. So on the right is the drawing. On the left, that's what bone really looks like. Boy, it's a whole lot messier in real life. Although that's a pretty good look at an osteon from on top. Central canal, black are going to be the osteocytes. So that's how it's organized. I told you how your bones grow in width. They grow from underneath the periosteum. But how do they grow in length? I don't know if you remember, but earlier when we were doing our tissue lectures, I told you that the very first version of all of your bones was made out of hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage. So when you were still inside of your mama, you had a femur, little tiny femur, made out of cartilage. And it actually looked quite a bit like an adult femur. Now, cartilage cells are called chondrocytes. But when you were still inside of your mom, some of those chondrocytes says, I'm not satisfying being a chondrocyte. I want to be an osteoblast. And they turned into osteoblasts, and they started releasing the kind of matrix that would attract calcium and phosphorus. And then that little hyaline cartilage bone started turning into a bone kind of bone. That was called the primary ossification center. By the time you were born, there were other areas at the epiphyseal areas that also started to turn into bone kind of bone, and those get called secondary ossification centers. So when you were a baby, your bones looked like this. Let me show you what that looks like on an x-ray. Now, this is the femur and the tibia, and that's the fibula of a baby, a teenager, and an adult. clearly I have made the baby's knee much bigger, or that was like an enormous baby, right? But I made it bigger just so that we could compare things, okay? So here's the diaphysis of the femur, the epiphysis of the femur, the epiphysis of the tibia, the diaphysis of the tibia, right? Now, once you're an adult, this is kind of what your knee looks like, particularly if you're an adult who damaged their medial meniscus. There's your patella, by the way, that's the patella. So you can see the shape of the femur. You can see that medial condyle, lateral condyle. The reason that there appears to be a space between the two bones is because the articular cartilage at the ends of each bone occupies some space and are not white on an x-ray. And then you've got the meniscuses that are also not white on an x-ray. So this is an adult. Now look at the baby. What is going on there? It's crazy. Now, actually, if you were to operate on this baby's knee because the baby was playing basketball and hurt it, I don't know, you actually would find that the shape of the hyaline cartilage that's here really looks almost exactly like an adult's knee. It's just that since this area is still cartilage, it doesn't attract calcium and it doesn't turn white in an x-ray. So we are seeing all of this is the product of the primary ossification center, and this is secondary ossification centers. Now, as the baby grows up and turns into a teenager, that bone is still growing in length. How's it growing in length? It grows in length from the epiphyseal plates. Do you see what looks kind of like a crack in the bone? Not a crack in the bone. That is a growth plate. That is the area of this bone that you know that this teenager is still getting taller. Here's the other growth plate in the tibia. So the tibia is still getting longer. If you look right here, you'll see even the fibula is still getting longer. So the epiphyseal plates, they are busy making, this plate is making bone that it puts there, and it keeps pushing that bone farther and farther away, and you get taller and taller and taller. So now you know how to read x-rays. Next job. While you're growing, the epiphyseal plate is hyaline cartilage, is cartilage and has lots of very active cells that are busy growing. I don't understand what's going on with my slide here. But once you're done growing, these growth plates will become little scars, and for a while they'll show up in an x-ray as a delicate little line. Sorry, that was messy. So your epiphyseal plate is the growth plate. It's hyaline cartilage while you're still growing. When you're done growing, it turns into the epiphyseal line, and there's no more cartilage there anymore. So how does your bone grow in length? Epiphyseal plate. How does your bone grow in width? Periosteum. Periosteum. Good. So just a little bit more to talk about. We will pick up the rest of this in another video.